And welcome back. In a previous set of videos, we took a look at the concept of spanning tree protocol, which basically has one mission. He had one job, and that is to identify layer 2 parallel paths and then start blocking on one or more ports so we don't have layer 2 loops, because a layer 2 loop is going to lead to a broadcast storm where one broadcast just starts looping around the network endlessly at very, very high speed, and then the whole network goes bleh. That's the technical term. So behind the scenes, in addition to running spanning tree, we also want something that's paying attention and seeing whether or not we have like a broadcast storm that's happening. And if we do, to kind of tamp it down. And that feature is called storm control. So as we continue to build our list, our next one is storm control. Now, storm control is not a replacement for using spanning tree. We definitely want spanning tree to identify parallel paths and stop them. Also, if we have link aggregation groups, spanning tree sees that as one pipe, so that's not going to cause a problem. But we definitely want to leave spanning tree running in the event we make an additional connection somewhere and create a layer 2 loop, because we don't want a broadcast that's sent in by this device or anyone else to just loop endlessly. Now, besides broadcasts, and I'm referring to layer 2 broadcasts here with all the bits set to on, all Fs in hexadecimal, where a switch says, oh, I need to take that frame and forward it to all other ports associated with this VLAN. So storm control can pay attention to the amount of broadcast, but it also can pay attention to the amount of unknown unicast. And here's how that works. If a frame comes into the switch and the destination MAC address is a MAC address that the switch has not yet learned, meaning it doesn't know exactly where that MAC address lives, and it's a unicast MAC address. It's not a broadcast or a multicast, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. That's another type of frame that, if we had a layer 2 loop, would just continue to circle endlessly in our network. So as storm control, we can pay attention to a level of broadcast or a level of unknown unicast traffic, as well as a level for multicast traffic. So think of a broadcast as traffic that needs to go to everybody. A unicast needs to go to one specific device if the switch knows where that layer 2 address lives, and a multicast would go to a group of devices. An example of a multicast address would be a layer 3 OSPF address, like 224.0.0.5 or 6, depending on the role of that OSPF device. And in conjunction with that layer 3 multicast address, there's also a layer 2 MAC address. So storm control is disabled by default. We're going to use the command line interface to enable it. And what we'll do is we'll specify a rate. For example, 600 packets per second, or whatever we want the limiting rate to be where we start dropping that traffic. And then we can specify whether or not we want to enable the storm control for broadcast and or unknown unicast and or multicasts. And so not only can we set up the policy globally, but we can also set up a policy and apply it to individual ports as well. So let's take a moment right now. We'll focus on switch number 1 here, and I'll walk you through on how to implement and enable storm control. So to implement storm control, we're going to type in config space switch controller and a question mark. And what we want to do is enable storm control. So we'll just type in storm control, press enter, and then we'll do a show to see what's there. So currently we have the defaults for storm control. So if we did a command like this, set broadcast disable, and then we did a show, check it out. It doesn't show up because that's the default. So if we want to enable them, we do a set broadcast enable, and we'll do a set and a question mark, and let's do unknown unicast and enable. And let's do the same thing for unknown multicast, enable, enter, and we'll do a show. And now we've just enabled storm control for all 3 of those categories. And the default rate is 500 packets per second. So if we wanted to change that, we could do that as well globally right here with a set rate, a question mark, and then the range is from 1 to 10 million. So let's say we want to set the rate to 600, and then press enter, and then we'll do a show. So we've now just enabled storm control on all the managed switches that this firewall is managing. So if we had a scenario where we needed a specific port to use different values for storm control, here's how we would do it. We'd create a storm control policy, a specific one that we could then apply to a port. So we'll do that with a config, switch controller, and storm control once again, except this time it's going to be storm control policy. Press enter, we'll do a show. So currently we have a default policy, which is what ports are using by default. And what we want to do is create a custom policy that we can apply to a specific port. So we'll do an edit, we'll call it our storm-c for control, press enter, and then we can set our settings that we want for this policy. So we can do a set and a question mark and storm control mode of override, and that will override the defaults. And then we can do a set, and let's do a rate of, let's say it's 800, and let's set broadcast enable, and let's set the unknown unicast to disable just to mix it up a little bit, and set the unknown multicast also to disable. We'll do a show. So here's this custom storm control policy called our Storm C with these settings. So we'll type in end, and then we're going to go apply this to a port. We just do exactly that. So we'll do a config switch controller, manage switch, and we'll edit. And let's go ahead and use the same switch again. We'll copy paste that in for the switch ID. Then we'll do a config ports, do a show, and let's apply this to port 5. So I'll go ahead and just do an edit port 5. I'll copy and paste that, press enter. Then we'll do a set storm control policy, a question mark, and then there's our Storm C, and press enter. And we've just applied that custom storm control policy to port number 5 on the switch. So we'll type an end and end again, and we're done. Now, another type of an attack, which is pretty easy to pull off on most environments, is referred to as a MAC table overflow or a flooding attack, where basically we're sending in so many frames from the attacker machine with made-up source MAC addresses, trying to consume all the memory that the switch has for MAC addresses. And at the end of the day, if we pump in thousands and thousands of MAC addresses, it doesn't remember where anybody really lives. And as a result, the switch, when it receives the unicast frame, is going to flood it to all the other ports in the VLAN, including where the hacker is, so you can now eavesdrop on that traffic. So in the next video, as a countermeasure to that, I'd like to walk you through how we can restrict the quantity of MAC addresses that can be learned either in a VLAN or on a specific port. So we'll do that in the next video, and I'll see you there, my friend, in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.